Hello everyone, this is Jacob Grinder reporting for PJTWCentral.com. And yesterday I did an interview with John Hitchcock, author of the book Front Row Section D, true historian for the art form and sport of pro wrestling. Has tons of stories to share, and he opened up a little bit yesterday for an interview I did. It was a really great interview, so without further ado, here it is. How you doing? How you doing, John?
I'm doing great. It's nice to be sitting down with the next generation of wrestling fan.
Nice. Well, yeah, glad to have you. We're here at Parts Unknown Comic Book Store here in Greensboro, North Carolina. Greensboro, North Carolina used to be a hotbed for.
It was the hotbed.
The hotbed.
Yeah, it's an interesting time period when you start really thinking about it, because local wrestling started. I knew people. My mother remembered seeing wrestling in downtown Greensboro on top of the YMCA in the 40s and 50s. And she said she used to see flyers and stuff for it. And then when the Greensboro Coliseum got built, before that, everything was in Lexington. There's a Lexington YMCA that is huge and sits like, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 people. It's hard to believe there's a YMCA in Lexington, but that's where all the hot matches first started. Around 1964, they started showing local wrestling, which was the Jim Crockett, and it was on WGHP, Channel 8. And Crockett was real lucky because they paid a nominal fee, I'm sure, to get Charlie Harville, who was the sports anchor on the local news, to be the play-by-play guy on the wrestling shows. So immediately it created this sense of legitimacy, with it being, is it real? Well, they kind of treated it that way. But, when you start thinking about Greensboro and the magic of Greensboro is that, we had the Greensboro Coliseum. And when the first match I went to was in 1966, and it would seat between 8,000 and 9,000 people. And that was before there was an upper deck. Years later, they put an upper deck on it, and it seated like almost 15,000 people. And then they put expand the upper deck, and now it seats 21,000 people. Well, when you start thinking about buildings, Dorton Arena in Raleigh seats probably about 8,000. Charlotte, the old Charlotte Arena, Independence. Remember Independence? Now they call it Bojangles. That would probably seat about 8,000. Well, Greensboro was sitting 15,000. If you're a businessman, you got a hot product, you know where you're going.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to Greensboro. Well, that's what we grew up with, was being in the apex of the Mid-Atlantic Territory. We knew all the wrestlers, and we knew that Crockett lived in Charlotte, that everything was out of Charlotte, but all the big shows happened in Greensboro. So we got to see, like, everybody. I mean, I've got a wrestling poster in the back, and it's fascinating. They had Florida wrestling in the early 70s. Just came up here. And we got to see, Dory Funk Jr. versus Jack Briscoe, Terry Funk versus Jerry Briscoe. We got to see the Grahams, Eddie and Mike Graham. We got to see all the Hiro Matsuda. We got to see all these guys from Florida just come up and put on a show, just because, we had cable. I was lucky. I got cable television in 1969. For some reason, the Greensboro Triad area was an experimental test area for cable. And we got it very early, so we got to see everything. So Greensboro became the mecca of the Crockett Group. And the Crockett Group, ran in Greensboro up until December of 91. The only reason why I remember that is I still have the ticket stub,
Really?
That's when they went to Winston-Salem, and then eventually, they went out of, they were bought out by Vince McMahon. But there was an amazing thing. There's an amazing time period about being a kid and growing up in the 60s and the 70s, is that everybody knew about wrestling. Everybody talked about wrestling. It was like accepted culturally. There wasn't anybody looking down on you because you were a wrestling fan. Of course, you'd always get the old stuff. They say, that stuff's fake. And my answer to that was, well, yeah. But that's why I like it, because the guys aren't getting hurt. They're not really killing each other. If the guys were being, really badly injured and being smashed up, I might have a hard time dealing with it. But, part of the fun of wrestling is following it. And it becomes kind of a physical soap opera. And then they start developing really strong characters. And a big part of that is the characters were developed by the personalities and the talents of the wrestlers. They didn't have speechwriters back then. It was very simple. You always knew Ole Anderson hated Dusty Rhodes. You always knew that Magnum TA was a good guy. You always knew Ricky Steamboat was a good guy. You always knew that Ric Flair's odds are pretty good. He's going to be a bad guy.
Yeah.
But they were well established, and they didn't have speechwriters. Flair's famous line was how much time's in the match, what's who's going over, what's the finish. That's all he cared about.
Yeah.
He just needed to know the time. And then that's the way Arn and Tully Blanchard and all the great wrestlers, they had personalities. There's nobody like Tully Blanchard. Everybody immediately, you could tell, didn't like him because he looked like a conceited guy. He looked like a snotty, conceited guy. Maybe that's partly because he came out of Amarillo, Texas, and the San Antonio group, and his dad owned the promotion, so he probably got away with murder, being the son of the boss of the promotion. But yeah, Greensboro was it. I mean, they had a card once. It was they had Giant Baba, Tiger Mask, Jumbo Saruta. They had the Dynamite Kid. They had all these guys come in for one show because they wanted the Greensboro people to see these different styles and see these different people. It's fascinating. But it's amazing to think they would take a show. They'd go to Greensboro once a month, and they would say, "Okay, guess what? You're going to get to see this." And it didn't happen all the time, but every once in a while you would have it. So it was just Greensboro was just it. I mean, it was the greatest thing.
You said they ran once a month in the Greensboro Coliseum?
Yeah, once a month, right.
And I think nowadays WWE comes around once or twice a year, and they do about 7,000 people.
Maybe, yeah, but wrestling now is like the circus coming into town.
Yeah.
You want to take your kids to go see the guys on television. Buy a T-shirt or a cup with their name on it or something, and you just take the kids. But when I was a kid, we used to go. We'd always get a crew together. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it was your brothers. It was like Diamond Dan and Bud and Billy Pritchett and his brother, and we'd have a little crew when we'd go, and that changed everything because when you're by yourself, you're a little intimidated that somebody might take a swing at you or something if you start cheering for bad guys.
Yeah,
that's how I first met your brother Bud. Is that I was walking through the Greensboro Coliseum and there were these three guys sitting there, and they were wearing red shirts that had a hammer and sickle on the front, and then Ivan Crusher Nikita on the back, and it was Jimmy and Billy Pritchett and your brother Bud. When I saw that, I said, "Those are my kind of guys." They're heel fans. It's funny because I think I was kind of a twisted kid because I always loved the bad guys, and part of it was they did all the work, and they never got any applause. The best wrestlers on the show are usually the bad guys because they have to really work hard to put the good guys over.
For sure.
There are good guys that are good wrestlers, but I'm just saying it seemed to me as watching it as being a young kid that was part of it. And the other part of it was that the wrestlers were funny. I mean, they were really funny. Rip Hawk was hysterical. Rip Hawk once, just off the top of his head, said, Johnny Weaver reminds me of a New York taxi cab with both its doors open. Because he was making fun of his ears, and they would say stuff like that, and it would just be like a off the cuff thing. Yeah. Like one day, Charlie Harville was interviewing Brute Bernard and Skull Murphy, and Skull Murphy was Murphy was a really odd looking guy because he had this disease that caused all his hair to fall out, and he had a real hook nose. And he was a great interview, but he was really, he knew how to get that evil thing going on. Of course, Brute Bernard was walking around in a circle, yelling and screaming, go, whoa, and all that stuff. So it was so funny. It was like one day, it was like Charlie Harville says, well, can't you control this guy? And there was like Brute Bernard chewing on a wrestling poster. And he goes, if I had a son, I'd want him to grow up to be just like Brute Bernard. And of course, as a kid, you're watching this and you're going, that's great. I mean, there was something about the heels. There was a sense of humor, and you could identify with them because they had a sense of humor. And the Blackjack Mulligan once said the thing about the heels were they're the most high paid jobbers in the business because the bad guy's always going to lose in the end. The story, the good guys are always going to prevail. And the old bookers used to say the same thing. They could tell you who's going to win at the Greensboro Coliseum, every single time, because if you showed up at the Coliseum and the parking was packed and the place was sold out, all the good guys are winning because we're sending them home happy. If it isn't full, we're going to get them pissed off, so they start talking about it, and then they want to come back and see the guy get his ass kicked. So, it was just a wonderful time to be a fan.
Well, who are some heels that stood out to you at the time?
Well, the first heel that I loved was the Missouri Mauler, Larry Hamilton. His brother was one of the assassins. But anyway, the Missouri Mauler was really funny. There was he did an angle when Skull Murphy committed suicide, and Missouri Mauler picked up Brute Bernard as his partner. And as a kid, you're watching this and you're going, well, that's good. Now he's got Brute Bernard seems he's a wild animal. He needs somebody to control him. This isn't in the book, this story, but so what they did is they had this Argentino Apollo was like an athletic, cartwheeling type guy, like kind of a takeoff of Antonio Rocca in WWE or WWF, but he was a real good looking guy, and they did this thing on wrestling where you watched it. This is like 1970, 71. And just in conversation with Charlie Harville, Argentine Apollo said that he liked to paint. So you come on the next week, and he's got his paintings up against the ring ropes. Now you know what's going to happen. Somebody's going to come out and attack his ass, because why they have this art show in the wrestling ring? It's begging for the question. So Brute Bernard and Skull Murphy Brute Bernard and Missouri Mauler come walking out, and the Missouri Mauler goes, "This is wrestling. This isn't some art show, some pansy-wansy art show. What in the hell is this?" And they're like, "Well, we're showing he's doing it, blah, blah, blah." So, of course, you know what happens. Oddly, they did not smash his paintings. They just decided to smash him. But what was great is when Brute Bernard ran out, he was wearing cowboy boots, blue jean, a plaid shirt, and a vest with like tassels hanging off of it. And to me, he looked so scary in his civilian, garb, what he wore in everyday life. And he runs out and he attacks Apollo. He goes down. Missouri Mauler is holding on to his hand and tells Brute Bernard to get him, and he's yelling at the top of his lungs, "Little Painter, get Little Painter!" Brute Bernard's going, "Whoa!" and he's stomping the shit out of the guy's hand, and he keeps dropping, keeps kicking him, and Apollo's squirming like crazy, and they finally, a couple of guys run out and chase him off, and then of course Archie Apollo has a cast for about 6 months. He must have been a slow healer, but it was just the whole idea that they would try to have a little art show to bring a little culture, and you knew when that was going to happen that the heels were going to come running in, and they were going to smash his ass, and that set up the big feud with those guys. But there was something about the Mauler had a sense of humor. There was something about him and the way he talked that had a edge of sarcasm, and he was funny. He was just funny. I always thought he was terrific. And Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen were the first really cool tag team heels that ever came about. Rip did all the talking. Sweet said nothing. One time they did an interview, and Rip basically took a breath, and Sweet said, "Yeah, I'm going to get him. We're going to get him." Yeah. And Charlie Harville goes, "Oh my God, Sweet Hansen can talk? We didn't know he could talk." And it was great. This is totally off the cuff. Rip Hawk goes, "Of course Sweet Hansen can talk. He's a very educated man. He went to major colleges, has ultimate degrees, blah, 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 blah. Go ahead and ask him a question, Harville. Ask him anything you want. He'll answer any question you got." And so Sweet Hansen's like standing there, bug-eyed, like, "What? Huh? What?" And he goes, "Yeah, go ahead and ask him." And he goes, "Well, Sweet, let me ask you this." And then Rip walks off and he goes, "Come on, Sweet." And Sweet goes, "Okay, Rip," and goes walking off. It's hard to explain it, something that was so visual. But there was something about them. And then, of course, when Ole and Gene Anderson came in, they were the guys that were serious. Dead serious. And Ole Anderson, might be the greatest interview in wrestling history. Because Ole Anderson made things real cut and dry. We're all about wrestling. We're not here about showing off. We're not here about, to make everybody happy. What we're going to do is we're going to cut this ring in half, and we're going to get somebody on our half of the ring, and once we get them in our corner, we are going to beat the tar out of them and we're gonna beat them up, and we're gonna make them submit. We're gonna break them. It's not pretty. We're not saying we're pretty. We're interested in one thing, and that's beating people and making money. That's our job, is to beat people, and that's it. And and then he used the famous line, a three-legged chair cannot stand. And sometimes they grab a guy's arm, and sometimes they grab a guy's leg, and they would just keep beating on him until the guy would give up. Very simple, basic, but that was the magic of early wrestling too. Is you didn't want to do something too in depth. You wanted it to be a thing where you could turn on the TV, and within an hour, you could understand who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. You like him or you don't like him. Very simple, because then when the next guy turns on the TV and sees it, he can easily get in on it and he can understand it.
For sure.
The stuff's too detailed. You remember when WCW was running at a time at the end, you turn on the TV and you go, well, they must think Lex Luger's a pancake. He's a good guy, he's a bad guy. He's a good guy, he's a bad guy. Why do you care?
Yeah.
They kept flipping guys so much, they thought that was important. Wasn't important. Excuse me, at all. But you develop these characters, and that was the magic of that simple idea. But Ole Anderson and Gene Anderson, Gene did the majority of the wrestling, and Ole was the mouth, and Ole was terrific at everything he did, but they created a sense of legitimacy. The story I always heard later, after going to these Legends reunion and talking to people, they said that Ole and Gene, when they would be wrestling somebody on television, is they would tell those guys, we're going to grab one of you, we're going to get you in the ring, we're going to get you in our corner, and your job is to make that tag. That's your job. And our job is to stop you from making that tag. We want this to look as legitimate as possible. So you fight, you claw, you do everything you can, because if you make the tag, it's not your fault. It's our fault, because we didn't stop you. So that's how it works. You go ahead and you try, you do everything you can. And the Andersons used to do brilliant stuff where the guy would grab Gene, for example, and pick him up to slam him. And while he was in there, he'd reach out with his backhand and he'd tag Ole. So the guy would be running and he'd grab his leg and Ole run in and attack him. They used to block. They would make tags and the other guy would block the guy into the corner for the referee can't give him a 5 count. They'd always get out. Everything they did was legal. But it was like ruthless. It was real brutal, real ruthless, no playing around, real serious stuff. And when you do the repetition, psychology of it, the repetition of doing that, where you're blocking the ring, and you start beating a bunch of job guys, then everybody immediately knows what they're going to do, why they're doing it. This is what's going to happen. And then when it would happen to somebody like Johnny Weaver, or happen to you name it, any baby Paul Jones, or any babyface, the crowd would go crazy. Oh my God, they got Ricky Steamboat. They're going to beat the hell out of Jerry Briscoe. You know what I mean? And then they would fight, and the guy would just get worn out, and then he finally made the tag. And when he made the tag, the Coliseum roof would pop off, because they're like, finally, the guy gets a break, the fresh guy's in, and the odds were pretty good that they would then beat the Andersons up for a little while, but they'd always make that mistake, and then they grab him and put him in the corner again, and they just crush him. It was a very simple booking process, but the simple edge of it was the genius of it. You make it simple enough that any idiot can turn it on and understand what's going on.
Yeah.
You can't do that now, but you could do it then. You understood real quick who were the good guys, who were the bad guys.
That's interesting. Is there any like faces? You said you kind of lean toward heel or bad guys. Is there any like good guys that you kind of stood out to you at the time?
Well. If you talk to anybody that's in their 50s and they were at the Coliseum, everybody would tell you that, the big feud of the early 70s was Johnny Valentine and Wahoo McDaniel. And Wahoo McDaniel was a tough guy. I mean, he was tough. And, he played football for the Jets. He went down and played with the Dolphins. I got to talk to him once. I gave him one of my wrestling posters because he had no wrestling memorabilia at all, so I gave him one with Johnny Valentine on top. He said, I want Valentine. He said, everybody asked me about him. And so I started talking to him, and he says, he said, the biggest mistake I ever made was going down to play for the Dolphins, because the next year, Joe Namath leads them to the Super Bowl. The Jets beat the Colts, and I would have been on that team, and I'd have got a Super Bowl ring. But instead, he goes down and plays for Miami. And he was one of the first big stars of the AFL, because they'd say, tackle by who? And the crowd would chant, Wahoo. And he played a little bit for Oklahoma, He was an Oklahoma legend, athlete-wise. Anyway, so Wahoo there was something really special about that guy. And he was really, really tough. And I've already said this before, but what the heck? When he and Johnny Valentine got in the ring, well, I asked Wahoo, I said, can you explain it? I said, you guys beat the hell out of each other. I mean, it was not like anything you've ever seen. And he said, every time I got in the ring with Valentine, it was a test of my manhood. He tried to knock my head off. And if I wanted to survive in this business, I had to knock his head off. He said, I'm telling you, every time we got in the ring, that's the way it was. It was a man-on-man competition to see who was going to be the toughest that night. Lou Thez said in his book, The Hooker, if Johnny Valentine knew any amateur wrestling at all, he would be the dangerous man in the world because he didn't bother. He was just that tough. And he was about 6'2", 6'3", bronze, always tattooed, tanned. Mm-hmm. And Wahoo was just tough. He was tough as hell. And if you ever sat there, and I was there for all that stuff, Wahoo would haul off and chop Johnny Valentine, and he would hit him so hard that the sweat and the blood would fly off Valentine's chest and go 5 and 6 rows deep in the crowd. And you could see the crowd wincing and blinking and rubbing their eyes and wiping sweat and blood off their face because they got hit so hard. These guys tried to kill each other. So I just asked him, I said, what was the deal? I mean, come on. I mean, every night? And he said, all thing I can tell you is one night I got so pissed off, Wahoo said he hauled off, he tried to knock his head off. He decided, screw this shit, I'm going to hit him. And he knocked the hell out of him. And he said Johnny Valentine took about 3 steps backwards, and he looked at Johnny Valentine's arms, and there were chili bumps running up and down his arms. He said the only way to explain it is he loved it. He loved the contact. He loved the hitting. He loved it. And he said, and of course, once Wahoo hit him that hard, guess what? He got hit hard just as bad, or even worse. Valentine had this wonderful move where he would back guys into a corner, and he put their chin over the top rope. Like Sheamus does, where he grabs the guy and bends him over. Mm-hmm. Sheamus hits a guy with that forearm about 20 times. Johnny Valentine would do it one time. He'd swing it like a pendulum on a clock, and he'd swing down, and that forearm would hit him in the chest, and they would be on their knees trying to grab their breath. Tony Atlas, I saw Tony Atlas's first match. Valentine hit him with it. Tony Atlas was on his knees. You could see him going, whoo, 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 whoo. And then Johnny Valentine picked him up, showing the great gentleman that he was, bent him over the top rope, hit him harder, and then Valentine grabbed him and then threw him in the corner to make the tag to Weaver, because that was it. 2 punches. That was it. Because nice. It was just Johnny Valentine and Wahoo McDaniel, they set the bar. Then when the plane crash happened, and that was like, 75, 76, and, Flair was out with a broken back. Johnny Valentine never wrestled again. Bob Bruggers never wrestled again. Tim Woods was lucky. He did wrestle again. And David Crockett was able to come back and be an announcer, to be the babyface shilling announcer. But when Flair was out and Valentine was out, they brought in Blackjack Mulligan. And there's no bigger babyface star than Blackjack Mulligan. Of course, he started out as a heel, tagging with Flair. And then when Flair turned on him, Flair just told him he was an old man, it's time for him to ride off in the sunset. And then Blackjack got mad, and then that was that. And then it was the famous, hat and the robe angle that everybody talks about, where Flair, Blackjack had a nice cowboy hat, Stetson from Willie Nelson. Flair tore it up. Then Blackjack came out the next week wearing Flair's robe, and he tore Flair's robe up. And so that created a whole new thing. But when Blackjack was in another feud, Flair's first big feud when he came back was against, that's right, Wahoo McDaniel. So yeah, Wahoo you got to have a great deal of respect for Wahoo McDaniel, and another guy too, and he was a heel, but Harley Race. I mean, Harley Race was one of the toughest guys that ever walked the planet. I once got lucky enough to talk to Gordon Soley a couple of times, and I just asked Soley straight up. I said, who was the toughest? And he goes, Harley Race. I said, what about Johnny Valentine? He goes, oh, don't get me wrong. He said, Johnny Valentine, oh my God, but he said Harley Race was it. He said, I've already told this story before, but Harley Race was he was in a car crash when he was 16, had a broken back, said he could never work again. He held the world title 7 times. And back then, when you held the title, you were the baddest man on the planet. And nobody wanted to mess with that guy because he was just that strong and that tough. He was the first guy who ever jumped off the top rope and did headbutts, which, of course, is why he had neck surgery. And he was a serious, serious guy. Just hand that to her. Hello. How you doing? Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Yes, ma'am. Anyway, it was. Where was I?
Let's see. On location here, folks, at a parts unknown comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina. You were.
The mail just arrived. threw us off kilter.
We were talking about Harley Race being the toughest.
Harley Race was the story that Soley told me was that they were down in Florida, and it was Race and Soley and Tiger Conway Jr. And if you remember, Tiger Conway Jr. had a big afro, and they were at this redneck bar, and the story goes that Tiger got up to use the bathroom, and when he went to the bathroom, 5 or 6 big white, redneck guys followed him in the bathroom, and Race looked at Gordon. He said, "Excuse me for a minute, Gordon. I think Tiger needs my assistance." And he walked into the bathroom, and those 5 guys were beating the hell out of Tiger Conway. And Race walked in, and within 3 minutes had beat the shit out of all 5 of them, left them laying, picked up Tiger Conway, dried him off, told him to come out. They went in, they sat down, finished eating their meal, and the other guys from the bar walked into the bar to find out what was happening and found all their buddies just destroyed by one guy. And Soley said, he said they sat there unbothered by all the people in that bar because they went, "We don't know who the hell Harley Race is, but we know one thing, he's serious because he just kicked the shit out of 5 guys and had no problem doing it and did it quickly." Race was serious business. I mean, he was a serious tough guy. Sadly, there's not a lot of babyface guys that I love. I think Ricky Steamboat was a tremendous. Right. I think Ricky Morton was one of the great sellers of all time. We used to sit on the front row and start laughing because we go, we may not like Ricky Morton, but I tell you one thing, nobody takes a beating like Ricky Morton. He would sell the beating like crazy and make that big tag for Robert Gibson, and then it was on. It was on, man. It was something. So, but the 2 greatest wrestlers I ever saw were, and they're totally opposite people, but they have the one thing in common, and they love it. They love wrestling as much as anybody alive, and that's Flair and Terry Funk. Those 2 guys from another planet, the stuff Terry Funk did in ECW is textbook, brilliant psychology. It's the stuff that's missing from wrestling now. The whole psychology. There was one match where Funk took this beat and he fell out of the ring and he laid on the carpet floor and he squirmed around like a dog, like he had brain damage. And everybody, all those hardcore fans believed that he was hurt and he was in bad shape. Terry Funk was a genius. He's still a genius. As physically understanding everything. Knowing the psychology. I told this story before, but it's true. But if you think back on some of the great wrestlers, and you think about some famous stuff, if you remember in UWF when Bill Watts would be in the ring, he would haul off and hit somebody with a punch. And of course, the guy he hit, it's usually Bobby Eaton or somebody. They would sell it all over. They would bounce all over the place. And then what did Bill Watts always do? He'd grab his hand and shake it. He'd shake it like, man, that hurt my hand. I hit him so hard. He's selling the fact that he hit the guy. The guy's selling the fact that he's falling all over the place. Selling the punch, and then he's selling Then the genius of it is he's selling the fact that he hit him so hard he hurt his own hand. Yeah. All that stuff's gone. All the little stuff's gone. That's why tag team wrestling doesn't work nowadays. It's because they don't sell anything. If you want to get a hot tag on a guy, you get one guy in the ring and you beat the bloody hell out of him, and you make it look like there's no way this guy's going to ever get out of that corner. And then through a miracle, he finally, you have his partner finally run in and attack him for a minute. They take him out and say, "You had your one save." And then when he finally makes the tag, and he finally gets there, and you tease it, but when he finally gets there, that's when the crowd pops. That's when the crowd goes crazy. Now, part of that's gone because, they admit everything's a show, that wrestling's, athletic performance, whatever. But if it's done right, and you get the heat on that guy, and you really start laying him out, and he has to make that tag, and you start worrying that he's really hurt, well, you're going to get that reaction, but you got to sell it. and you got to have everybody else sell it that he's really getting his ass kicked. You don't turn it into a joke, you know.
Well, yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, Terry Funk in the '90s was pulling off the reactions you talked about based on the psychology you were already speaking about, and in the '90s it was known as a show as well. So there's no doubt that it could still be done today. What do you think?
It's just a different era. It's a different time. We used to always joke all the time, calling fans true believers.
Yeah.
That they think everything they see in there is real. Mm-hmm. How many of those people are around anymore? I don't know. But if you do it right and you really put some heat on somebody, a good example is if you look at wrestling now, you look at Brock Lesnar, and even though they've totally screwed up the whole thing about Brock Lesnar, is he should be a Ultimate Fighting guy who's eating people up, and the reason why he's eating them up is because he knows how to take a guy down and put him in a submission. He knows that stuff. And if you had him go through 3 or 4 guys where he would grab a guy and put a Kimura on him or choke him out, and then you could have the other wrestlers going, man, we got to start training a different way. We got to start thinking a different way. Because this guy's opened up a bag that we ain't got. He's got this Ultimate Fighting stuff. There's nothing wrong with using some of that in wrestling today. But what did they use Brock Lesnar? They finally figured out after he beat the shit out of Cena in that first match. And of course they screwed up by having Cena win the match, which was ridiculous. But if you had him destroy somebody, and then you have everybody go, uh-oh, and they still have a little bit of it now. But just before his match, you hear the buzz of the crowd because they're like, what's he going to do? Well, now you know what he's going to do. He's going to suplex you. And he's going to do 15 or 16 straight. Now, that's cool, but that's not Ultimate Fighting. That's just Greco-Roman wrestling, throws. But he has that thing that is scary. And if he's handled right, he can be real scary. And then what you do is you finally have him chew through a lot of guys, and then whoever you're going to make the big star, you have him go up against him, and you have him chew that guy up, and then finally have the guy, get lucky or whatever and win. And then that's the guy you run with. You don't change your mind, have Seth Rollins run in and win the belt. Mm-hmm. What you do is you have the guy take a terrible beating, show he's tough as hell. He can really take it. He's really tough. And then you have him, what's wrong? I always like the idea of no matter how tough you are, anybody can get knocked out. Mm-hmm. Anybody can get knocked out. So you have a guy you have Roman Reigns versus Lesnar, and Lesnar's just killing him, and then suddenly out of nowhere he comes off the ropes and hits him with a big punch, and make it look good, and he knocks him out, and everybody goes, holy shit, where'd that come from? Place will go crazy. Right. And then you say, well, anybody get knocked out. I mean, it's no shame of that, but they're not smart enough to do that. Triple H doesn't want anybody to look too good. He wants everybody to remember how decent he was. He wasn't great. He was decent.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
But babyfaces, the thing about them that's funny is they believe their hype. The heels never believe their hype because their hype was they're jerks, that they're bad guys. So, people begin to believe their hype, there's a problem. They should never believe their hype because there's an army of people that are laying down and selling and making the guy look good. So never forget that all these people are doing it for you. So it's time for you to, give them something.
Yeah. Was there any cases back in the day where some baby faces, believe their own hype, and you guys as cheering for the heels?
The famous one was the Harley Race Magnum TA night.
Yeah.
Where Race, we didn't even know this match was coming. And Magnum was they're pushing Magnum like crazy. You probably know a little bit. You remember they used to have Magnum beat guys with belly to belly in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And after a while, that got to be pretty boring for me. So I didn't like Magnum because I thought you just mail it in. Well, anyway, one night in Greensboro, they had Harley Race come out to face Magnum. And as soon as we saw Harley Race, we knew Harley Race is legit. Harley Race is the real deal. I mean, you don't mess around with Harley Race. He's a tough guy. Multiple-time world champion. When it meant something. When the old NWA champion had to wrestle 36 territories, Puerto Rico, and Japan. Okay? Mm-hmm. those guys are road warriors. Those guys, it's incredible what they were able to do. Roddy Piper said that wrestlers back then were the last gladiators. And it's true. I mean, imagine getting in your car and driving and doing that and then partying and then getting up, working out, getting something to eat, and then go to the next town. I mean, you're just on the road, all the time. Anyway, senior citizen moment. So what happened was Race comes back in the back room. This is before the match. And Dusty grabs him. Dusty was the booker, and he grabs Race, and he goes, look, I want you to go out and do a job to my boy Maggie in, 2 or 3 minutes. And Race goes, what? He said, no, I ain't doing that. He goes, come on, do me a favor. We're going to put this guy over. We're going to build Magnum up to be the next world champion. He's got to get some big wins. Just go on out there and do it. And Race just said no, he wouldn't do it. He just said no way. And so Magnum hears this argument between the booker and Race, between Rhodes and Race. And he walks up and he goes, what's the problem? And Race looked at Magnum and he said, well, the problem is he wants me to lose to you in like 3 minutes. And I got too much pride for that. I'll do a count out. I'll do a DQ. But I'm not going to walk out there and have you kick my ass in 3 minutes. I'm sorry. Those guys have pride, So Magnum looks at Dusty and goes, let me handle this. So Dusty walks away. And he goes, well, look, I got an idea. Why don't we just settle it in the ring? You don't want to do that with Harley Race, settle it in the ring. I was there. I saw it. I could tell you, it's in the book, but Race just, they had they tried to have a decent match, and then Race finally just decided to kick Magnum's ass. And we had a sign that said, Fagnum PU. We were messing with the guy. And we were cheering for Harley. We're chanting, Harley, Harley. And then Harley Race grabbed Magnum, threw him over the top rope, right at us. The guy was so agile. But when Magnum hit the floor, Race had already gone through the ropes and was on the ground, picked him up, scooped him, slammed him in front of us, and he said, read that sign, boy. Tommy Young called for DQ. And Race turned around and walked away. We kept chanting, Harley. So we decided to get Magnum's head a little bit,
Yeah.
We're like, hey, Magnum, we thought this was your town. I thought you were a big deal, You let that old man kick your ass? I mean, he just kicked your ass. Magnum gets in the middle of the ring, and he's hot. And he grabs the mic, and he goes, Race, nobody does that to me in Greensboro. Get your ass back here. We're going to settle this. And Race was great. Race stood right on the ring, right outside the ring, and he looked at us and shook his head like, what the hell? And he grabbed the mic, and he said, boy, I've already kicked your ass once. I guess I'm going to kick your ass again. And we're like, uh-oh, it's on. And the spot where the good guy steps through the ropes when he's crouched on the second rope and the good guy attacks him, well, they did flip that. And what happened was Race was stepping through the ropes, Magnum attacked him, Harley threw his shoulder into him, suddenly grabbed Magnum and got a running start, and he threw him over the top rope, but he threw him like a frisbee. He's going sideways like this. He's spinning sideways, lands on the ground. Race jumps out of the ring, grabs him, picks him up, scoops him, slams him on the concrete, no give, no padding, picks him up, punches him right in the face, spits on him, then walks out. And we're chanting, Harley, Harley. So we're like, hey, Magnum, I thought you said you were a big deal. I thought you said you were going to handle this.
Yeah.
Magnum was, he had lost it. He was so pissed off. So, we always had a theory. We don't know if this is 100% true. We always had a theory that when a babyface got to be too big for his britches, they would bring in Stan Hansen or Bruiser Brody or Abdul the Butcher or somebody and just say, teach him a lesson. Kick shit out of him.
Yeah.
And bring him down to earth. Because the good guys always forget how many people, laid down for them. They always forget that.
What's up?
Big E. I can't believe it. You're a good one. Okay. I'm on a roll. Ask me another good one.
All right, sounds good.
John Hitchcock, the guy that doesn't breathe, just keeps on rattling off.
Well, I was wondering, back in the day, you guys said you guys caught a lot of heat with other fans for cheering on the bad guys and stuff. But nowadays, it seems like a lot of people, like wrestlers especially, are speaking about the internet ruining wrestling because a lot of fans are just cheering for the bad guys. Do you see that as a problem that the fans need to fix for cheering for whoever they like, or do you think that maybe the industry needs to work on more creative ways to come up with why we should cheer for good guys?
I think the easiest way in the world to create a good guy is to create a terrible, terrible bad guy. A guy that you go, man, I don't like that guy. Mm-hmm. There was a really funny story where we were sitting together and a crew. And these two kids walked up, and they just said, "Would you mind explaining to me how you can cheer for the Four Horsemen?" And I said, "Come on, the Horsemen are cool, man. They got the belts, they got the money, they got the girls, they got limousines. Come on." And the kid looked at me, and it was like he was dead serious. And he said, "Look, Ric Flair is the Nature Boy. He's a legend. Ole Anderson, he's the Rock. He's Minnesota Wrecking Crew. He's a tough man. Mm-hmm. Arn Anderson, he's the Enforcer. The Arn Anderson's a tough guy." And he said, "But that Tony Blanchard, he's a sumbitch. We hate that Tony Blanchard. How could you cheer for Tony Blanchard?" The fact that he didn't even know the guy's name made it even better that he mispronounces his name. But it was always the great theory that Tully Blanchard was such a bad guy that he turned all those other guys bad. If you want to create a great baby face, you create a monster heel. And you show the guy that goes up against him has guts, he's tough, he hangs in there. You turn it into a much more physical thing. John Cena, I like John Cena. I think he's a talented guy. But I always feel like John Cena is kind of like WWE's version of Sting. He's a guy that works his ass off, but he ain't got it. Whatever Ric Flair had, whatever Terry Funk had, whatever, charisma some of these guys, the top guys had, Cena don't have that. But, part of the problem with Cena was they brought him in as a guy with a chain around his neck, and he was a rapper. And the established fans were going to hate that no matter what. They were going to hate that whole character concept because it was stupid. I can rap. I'm part of this new generation. Well, all the heel fans are going to hate that guy.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when they used to have. Remember the guys that used to went to WCW on skateboards.
Oh, yeah, the dynamic dudes.
How could you like those guys? They look like a bunch of jerks. They look like they're pussies. Why would you cheer for those guys? Because they're on skateboards and they're dressed in pink and yellow. I mean, come on. You might get the girls to like you, but the guys are going to obviously hate you. Part of the problem is the psychology, and they've got the right guy in Lesnar. He could be the ultimate heel guy, but you got to let him chew some people up. You got to really have him really beat some people down. Are you late, sir? You got to go?
Yeah. I didn't want to.
Okay. We'll take another break.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
No, you're fine. We can edit it.
Have you seen Mr. Light any?
No. I actually haven't seen him in quite a while. My life's been taken up by Layla.
I know. You never come by here anymore.
I come when I can. She had my car for the whole month. She had my car for 30 days. So her car was broke. We couldn't really afford to get it fixed. Then my car messed up. The radiator busted.
Well, John, you already talked about how Ricky Morton was one of the best sellers of all time. You talked about Ivan Koloff being a great heel. They had a lot of good Russian chain matches, or at least one good Russian chain match back in the day. What do you think about them bringing back the stipulation for John Cena and Rusev, and what do you think about that whole angle and storyline?
Well, I think they did a great job of establishing Rusev as being a bad guy, but they don't really. You can tell the fans don't hate him. When you drop a Russian flag and all that stuff, you say to yourself, well, everybody should boo the hell out of him, but they really don't. Which is like, maybe part of it's because Lana's so hot that people are checking her out. But the problem with using a Russian chain match is when they used to use it in the old days, there was a lot of blood in them. And there's really totally a ban on the blade now unless it's hard way. Of course, that didn't stop Brock Lesnar from blading himself in that last match with at WrestleMania against Reigns. You could see him pull the blade out when he hit his head on the post. But chain matches are grisly things. They're really dark and they're really grisly. The master was, Ivan Koloff and, of course, the great Boris Malenko down in Florida. Malenko came up here, was a manager. He wrestled some, but he was more of a manager guy. But he was one of the all-time greatest heels in the history of the business because he was, the Russian madman. Of course, everybody remembers his sons, Joe and Dean, Malenko, terrific wrestlers. But I don't think a Russian chain match is going to work unless you make it really dark. And I don't think they're selling that anymore. They're selling bubble gum and wrestling figures and rings where you can spring the guys off and they're not selling a more competitive one-on-one kind of thing. Wahoo McDaniel used to have an Indian strap match, and the big gimmick was he never lost one. And you know what? Looking back on it, I never saw him lose one. That's the only match he ever beat Johnny Valentine was with an Indian strap match. And then when the match was over, Valentine beat the hell out of him with his strap match with the piece of strap. I think it's a good idea, but the only way for it to work properly is you have to turn it into something that's pretty hard hitting and pretty dark, and you have to use blood to make it mean something. Because I'm not a blood guy. I'm not into that. Even though I grew up watching Ric Flair gash himself for my $10, for 20, 30 years. When it's done right and it's effective, you can show somebody with a great deal of courage. I don't think that WWE is shooting for that. I don't think they're trying to figure out another way to have another match with Cena versus Rusev. Would make it a little more interesting. Make it seem like it's Rusev's match.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't have any problem with Cena. I think Cena's is terrific. But I think one of the big weaknesses he has one real small strength, really good strength is he never tries to do anything that he can't do. And people may criticize certain wrestlers; they only do 5 moves. Kevin Nash, he only does 5 moves.
Yeah.
But Cena always makes sure to not try to do anything that puts himself in jeopardy. Matter of fact, he never would have been pushed like he was if Triple H hadn't got hurt so many times, and Michaels was going to retire, and Undertaker was part-time. He was the only guy that was still standing there that was a babyface that was healthy.
Yeah.
But you can tell they're beginning to phase him out, putting him with the U.S. belt, and then now they're going to start pushing, Reigns and. Hopefully they'll push Ziggler. I think Ziggler's the best wrestler in the business right now.
You think Ziggler's the best wrestler?
Yeah, I like Ziggler. Ziggler's is old school seller. He tries harder to make his stuff look good than on the defense where he's selling for people, than makes his own stuff look good a lot of times.
Yeah.
I like yes. I like Daniel Bryan, even though he's going through a concussion problem. Of course, he had that problem when he was in Ring of Honor. But he's a guy that gets out there and goes 110%. But Ziggler, to me, is the guy that knows how to sell better than anybody in the business. He's terrific. It's just a question of how they're finally going to use him. They never seem to use him properly. He's always, when he had that big run where he was the last guy on the team. Remember that? And he ended up fighting everybody and winning it by himself against 3 guys. Yeah. Was that against the Authority?
Yeah, it was Survivor Series.
Yeah, that was terrific. But what they do with him the very next night, he comes out on Monday night and they cheat and he does the job. There's this weird booking thing with that Triple H and Stephanie have, where a guy emerges out of the pack and then they want to stuff him back down. You need to run with a guy and you need to have him win a bunch of matches and do it convincingly.
Well, what do you think that is? Because we have guys like Dusty Rhodes, Arn Anderson, Ricky Steamboat working for WWE. Why wouldn't they have?
They got to look out for their ass. They got to look out for their job.
Yeah. Okay.
They claim the 2 people with the most respect in the back room are Arn Anderson and Ricky Steamboat. After the matches, all the young guys, they run to them and say, "What do we do right? What do we do wrong? You tell us," because they respect them. They know what they're talking about. The booking's never going to be great as long as as long as Triple H and Stephanie, and then it's filtered through Vince McMahon right now, and there's obviously gaps in logic in the booking.
Oh, yeah.
A good example is, why would you have in that Survivor Series? Why would you have Rusev, the Big Show, and Mark Henry on one team? Mark Henry had been in a feud with him for a month and a half, getting his ass kicked.
Yeah.
Big Show had been in a feud with him for about 2 or 3 weeks, and he was getting beat up. Why would those 2 guys be on his side? Because they're worried about the Authority firing them? No, that wouldn't enter into it. It should not enter into it. They should, if they would have been really smart, they would have had those 2 guys look at each other, talk to each other right in the ring just before it happened. They look at each other, and they look at Rusev, and they look at each other, and they talk for a second, and they go, okay. And then both of them grab Rusev and throw his ass out.
Yeah.
And then say, okay, and then go, see ya, and then have the match. And then everybody go, oh, well, they don't like him. They hate him.
Yeah.
You know, there's little things that are starting to miss. There's little things that they forget. And it all goes to the top. You know, you cannot allow things like that to happen when you're trying to establish, you know, a storyline that, you know, is like A, B, you got to connect the dots. And they don't connect the dots. They forget. You create feuds. Those feuds should last for at least 5 or 10 years, where this guy doesn't like this guy. Whenever somebody would come into, you know, I was a kid, and it didn't take a genius for me to figure out that you know, that Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen were bad guys, and Johnny Weaver and George Becker were good guys.
Yeah.
Simple, you know, but it seems to get lost. Matter of fact, I contend that the wrestlers now, as far as pure talent and what they can do, are as good as any time in the history of the business. But they're not used right. And part of that, too, is speech writing. You know, I mean, if you're going to write speeches and hand it to guys and have them memorize it, there's going to be a blandness to the product because they don't have any personality. When a heel would do an interview, he would cut the hell out of the babyface. He cut the shit out of him and get him pissed off, and it gets you pissed off. You want to see that good guy come in and kick his butt. Yeah, simple. But they don't do it like that. They do heels now that will make a speech, and they'll leave the door open for the babyface to say something smart alecky and take his heat away from him. Until you start getting, you know, more serious about it, as far as, you know, and as long as WWE has that contract where they're going to get paid if the show's good or bad or whatever, you know, after a while, does it really matter if they put on a good show or not? If they have pride, you know, they should. Mm-hmm. But you get to see the same stuff over and over and over. I mean, how many times have Rusev beat that one guy?
Jack Swagger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
150,000 times on television?
Yeah.
Has he ever won one? Who gives a damn? I mean, aren't you kind of like going, hey, we don't have anything to fill up right now, and Jack Swagger's obviously going to lose because we've seen him lose 1,000,000 times. If you're going to do that many times, you ought to at least let him win one.
Oh, yeah. At
least one. I mean, Rusev's now lost, but I don't know. It's real, to me, old-time fans get real frustrated with it.
Yeah.
You know, when you looked at the old wrestling, like Eddie Graham, the booking down in Florida, the guy was a genius. They said that when he would set up an angle and he would set up a match, he would sit down with the two wrestlers and he would tell them 7 or 8 things that they have to achieve during this match to make this work. Okay? Mm-hmm. You know, when George Scott was booking Wahoo McDaniel and Johnny Valentine and Steamboat and Flair and the Andersons and, you know, and Paul Jones and, you know, all those guys, all this incredible talent, they all seemed to go a certain way. And if the turn happened, it would happen after 1.5 years of somebody being a good guy, where a guy would turn. And then it would mean something. But what do I know? I just run a funny book store, you know.
Well, who do you see on the, other than you mentioned Ziggler, who do you see that you particularly like nowadays?
I think there's some really good guys. I think the Usos are talented. Mm-hmm. I think the guys, what's the Bruiser Brody guy?
Luke Harper?
Luke Harper. Mm-hmm. Luke Harper is terrific, very talented guy. Should be a guy who should be more of a solid heel and really beat a bunch of job guys. Maybe that's one of the problems. You don't have any job guys anymore. You know, you might have that stupid guy who goes, hey, hey, hey. But, you know, I mean, you know, they used to have guys that were jobbers who would go out there and, you know, and they would fight real hard, but they ended up losing. Mm-hmm. And then if you beat somebody that fought real hard, well, then you say, well, I beat somebody. But they don't really think like that anymore. They don't, you know, the thing isn't thought out the way it used to be. But, you know, there were guys that were brilliant bookers. I mean, I don't like Dusty Rhodes. I hate his guts. But the bottom line is, when he came to Mid-Atlantic from 84 to like 85, 86, he was doing some really good stuff, you know. Horseman, you know, Bring It, you know, Steamboat, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah.
There was some good stuff. But then he continued to book himself over everybody else. And, you know, the great bookers, I mean, Bill Watts is a good example. When Bill Watts knew physically he couldn't do it anymore, He got behind the mic, became a color commentator, and then he would come out of retirement a couple of times a year to help the good guy get the bad guys, and then pop a big house. If you're as smart as you say you are, you step back and you say, I can't do this anymore. Remember when Dusty won the title, and he had it for, 2 weeks, then totally ran out and attacked him from behind, and Flair won the title? The reason why that happened is because Dusty couldn't do the travel. He couldn't travel 36 territories, Japan and Puerto Rico. He just wasn't physically in shape enough to do that stuff. Flair was a freak of nature. Flair could do it all day and all night and just keep on going. But there's some talented guys. I mean, there's some really talented people out there. AJ Styles, and I like Samoa Joe when he cares. Of course, he'd been at neutral for a long time there at TNA, but he learned to cash a check. TNA, really should stand for retirement. Retirement situation.
Have you heard the rumors about him Samoa Joe maybe signing to WB?
I've heard the rumor, but knowing them, they'll have him go down to developmental and try and then say, now we got to teach you how we wrestle. Gee, that's kind of stupid. But, here's a guy who's been main eventing for 10 years all over the country, all over the world, and you got to teach him something? Yeah. Well, that goes back to, do you really want to push these guys? I'm not up on NXT, but I know there's a lot of guys there that are very, very good, and they don't seem to be in a big hurry to push any of them. Right. And there's definitely openings for young blood for guys to come in. But it doesn't, do we have to look at another match with Randy Orton? We've seen Randy Orton wrestle everybody. Is Randy Orton a good wrestler? Yeah, he's a real good wrestler. Yeah. Is he a top 10 in my book wrestler? No, he isn't even the top 100 of my wrestlers. But I'm an old guy, so that's just the way I look at things. He's talented, but I liked his father. I thought his father was a better wrestler than he was. Cowboy Bob, before he became a flunky for Piper, he was tagging with Bob Roop down in Florida, and they were one of the most amazing physical tag teams of all time. They used to fly all over the place, and Bob Roop was a hell of an interview and a really badass. How'd he start out? He started out as the Olympic guy who won the Pan Am Games, Greco-Roman Army champion, blah, 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 the All-American boy, and then he turned. And when he turned, he became the All-American back jumper, and everybody hated his guts. And then he started tagging with Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. And Orton Jr. was one of the first guys I ever saw to jump off the second rope and hit people and, land on his knees. He was doing all this wild, high-flying stuff. Tremendous, tremendous talent. But then he ended up, wearing the pink hat and standing behind Piper as his bodyguard. And it was a gig. You get paid. That's great. That's what you're there for. But, he had a real edge about him. But there's until they decide it's time to, out with the old and bring in the new, we're going to be stuck with the same guys for quite a while.
Well, I kind of see Cena coming down the card. He's got the U.S. title now.
His body's starting to break down, from what I understand.
Oh, really?
And so, that's a smart move to take the focus off of him. When he talks about what's his mantra? Honor,
hustle, loyalty, respect.
Yeah. Well, what's wrong with him being in a situation where a guy he's wrestling shows none of those things? Shows no honor, no hustle, no respect. Well, don't you think it's time for him just to go ahead and open up a can of whoop ass and take that guy out? And just go, the bottom line is that people may say that I'm being mean or I'm being harsh or I'm a bad guy or something. I'm not being a bad guy. I believe in these things and he doesn't. So I'm going to beat it into him. What's wrong with doing that for a little while? I don't see why not. Because, let's face it, that's the magic of Steve Austin. Steve Austin was a bad guy who people decided to start cheering because, he was quick, great interview, funny, and he gave 120% in the ring. He was one of the all-time greats. Yeah. A guy who body was breaking down on him all the time. You see him with a brace, you see him with another brace, you see him with 2 braces on his knees. Every match, 110%. He worked his ass off. He always gave everything he had. There's very few guys that you respect as much as that guy. Really does. He was terrific. Terrific wrestler.
Would you say he's in your top 10 or 12?
Yeah, I would put him in my top 10.
Nice.
I haven't made a list, but but he really is something special. I have a great deal of respect for him.
Oh yeah, I remember we watched him on when they came to Greensboro Coliseum when I was a little kid. It was like WCW Saturday Night. I think him and I forget the main event, but I remember he was in there with hair and everything at the time, stunning Steve Austin. that was kind of cool. But is there anybody that you've seen in the Indies nowadays? Because I know you still go to some indie shows.
Well, I go to the Gibsonville stuff, the CWF.
Mid Atlantic.
Yeah, Mid Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
I like their stuff. I think it's really smart. Trevor Lee is from another planet. He's just terrific. 19 years old. They say his nickname in the back room's the Sponge. He's really good and really, the only thing holding that guy back is he's just not very tall.
Yeah.
And they got a phobia about that, but in the big leagues. But as good as he is, as talented as he is, he can go. He's really something special. He'll be gone before too long.
You think he'll be going down to?
Yeah, he'll go somewhere because he's too good.
Nice.
He's the one guy that really stands out. Sometimes you go to these independent shows and the guy who's booking the stuff, Brad Stutz, is a smart guy. He understands a lot of how to set things up and how to cross everything together. Boom, boom, boom. Everything makes a little bit of sense, and so that's really a good thing. But they've got some guys that you watch them and you go, they're getting better. It's not like they're the same old thing. There was a period of time where they didn't have their wrestlers were pretty mediocre. There was like Rick Converse and just a few other guys, but now they got a lot of really good guys. If anybody wants to see independent wrestling, North Carolina, they need to go to Gibsonville on Saturday night when they're throwing those shows, and you'll sit back and you'll be amazed at how good it is. Because it's very smart stuff.
Well, that's awesome.
Who do you like now?
Nowadays, I like Trevor Lee. Cedric Alexander in Ring of Honor really stands out to me from North Carolina. I would say Johnny Gargano. He's I think he wrestles in Dragon Gate and Evolve now. He's pretty good.
I don't think I've seen him.
I gotta give you some DVDs, some PWG. It's out of Los Angeles. Trevor Lee just wrestled Roderick Strong for the title over there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty good.
What's that guy, Steen?
Yeah, Kevin Steen.
He's down in developmental, right?
Yeah, that's the only reason I want to see Samoa Joe sign is because I want to see Steen versus Joe. Because I would say those would be, other than Takashi Morishima, like Steen and Joe were the two big guys who held the Ring of Honor title, but they never got a chance to wrestle or have a feud. Mm-hmm. So I think if they kind of do a feud in NXT, that could kind of just like tie everything together, even though it's a different company. I think it kind of play off. What do you think?
Yeah, you're more up to date on that stuff than I am, but yeah, I mean, there are certain guys that you say that are like matches made in heaven. You want to see them go against each other. Yeah. Back when I was growing up, the measuring stick was Jack Briscoe and Dory Funk Jr. That was the A+ match. Great wrestling. They, a lot of people would look at the stuff now and they go, God, they really are spending too much time, working holds. Well, that's what wrestling is. Yeah. And so it had an amateur edge to it, which meant there was a lot of reversals and headlocks and leg locks and arm locks and stuff. But I liked that stuff and I enjoyed it. And then the next big step was Steamboat and Flair, the first run in '77, because those two guys were that were in their 20s in their prime and just tore the house down. I mean, they were I don't think anybody's ever caught that stuff. The three matches they had when they got back together are still three of the best matches you'll ever see. I mean, really, it is. And I don't know if anybody ever topped that. I'll give you an example. I like Shawn Michaels. I think he's really good, really talented guy. He's a great wrestler. But I'd rather see Rey Mysterio Jr. in a match than him. It's just the way I look at it. I'd rather, one of the best wrestlers I ever saw during that whole time period, the 80s and 90s, was Benoit. I mean, Benoit never mailed a match in his whole life. He's one of the great tragedies. But I tell you one thing, that guy busted his ass every night. I mean, he really did, and he was terrific. There were many times I'd want to go over to watch the pay-per-view at Bruce Mitchell's house, and he would go. I'd say, I don't know if I really want to go see it tonight, and he goes, well, Benoit's wrestling. Okay, I'm coming.
Oh, nice.
That's all, because you always knew he was going to give it everything he had. I mean, everything he had. I met Benoit a couple of times, and one time I met him and backstage, and he was sitting on a stool, on a chair, and I said, "Excuse me, but aren't you Chris Benoit?" And he stood up. And when he stood up, he was in pain. You could see it was hard. His back was killing him. And he stood up. He looked at me, and I said, "I just want to let you know that right now I think your matches are the best matches in the world. And he looked at me and he goes, what's your name? And so I'm John Hitchcock. I'm one of the guys from Greensboro, sit on the front row, make the signs and everything. And he started laughing a little bit. He smiled and he said, yeah, he said, I remember you guys. And he goes, man, he said, just remember one thing. There's another guy in the ring with me. And I went, yeah, I know that. It takes two to tango and all that. But I said, but right now, your matches, you give so much. You work so damn hard. I said, I just want you to know, I think right now, your matches are the best matches, in the whole country. And he smiled and he shook my hand. And he just said, don't forget, John, there's somebody else in the ring working just as hard to make me look good. And when he shook my hand, it was like his hand was made out of chain link fence and was wrapped in burlap. I've only shaken two other hands like it, and that was the world champion boxer, Joe Frazier, and one of the greatest football players of all time, Jim Brown. They both had the same hands. They were just like rocks. It was incredible. And I was just as shooken up and just as sad when I found out what happened to Benoit and his family. There's no way to get over that, but that guy was lightning in a bottle. Incredible. Another guy who just, put his body out there every night and just gave it everything he had. Just terrific.
You mentioned earlier tag team wrestling. What do you think of the tag team champions, Kid and Tyson Kidd and?
They're very. I'm glad they're doing something with Tyson Kidd because the guy's got some kind of pedigree, being that he was the last guy in the Hart dynasty. That kind of stuff. I think those guys are really good. I think they've got a lot of really talented wrestlers, a lot of talented tag teams. But you have to create a heel tag team to really get everybody else over.
Yeah.
It seemed like WWE would remember that. They used to always have, they'd have the Blackjacks, they'd have the Moondogs, they'd have, you can just go on and on and on, all the different heel tag teams. And the heel tag teams would have a big run. And then when it was time for them to go, they'd get Tony Garea and somebody else. And then they beat them, and then they bring in another set of heel tag teams. Here comes the Valiant Brothers. Of course, they beat the hell out of them. They'd have a big run. But you need to. I think you need to. I've always been a firm believer that to create great baby faces, you need to create monster heels. Somebody that has got enough guts to stand up against them. That's why the Lesnar's been used wrong, because that's how you get a guy over. Is by having him defeat, a guy who's really been hurting a lot of people.
Awesome. Well, I think I got to actually run, John, but...
Hey, you got to go to work, go to work.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Legend, it's always good to see you. Take good care of yourself.
Appreciate it. And you can check us out at pjtwcentral.com. Hit me up on Twitter, JG Pro Wrestling, and PJTW Central on Twitter as well. Thanks a lot for listening, guys.
And we're celebrating Bud and Lisa's anniversary with this telecast.
Nice, yes. Congratulations, Bud and Lisa. Cool.